All right. Hello, everyone. Craig here. Welcome to a little bit of an experiment. My first live stream, just sort of testing out the kit. And so I thought I would actually just live stream a talk that I did last year in Sydney and in Austin, USA, before all of this pandemic stuff began. And really was talking about this concept of super mixing and the future belonging to super mixers. So it's a bit of a lengthy prezzo. Hopefully I can make it exciting for you. Try and use either that whiteboard back there or this little iPad whiteboard down the side here. Now, not sure how many people would be tuned into this because it's kind of like my first sort of dry run. I didn't send out an invite or anything, but this is a recording, so we'll see how it goes. Right, so what I wanted to share with you today was really, and you can see I'm still learning some of the tricks of the trade here. There we go. All right, so I wanted to sort of work you through this pack that specifically spoke about, I've referred to them as patterns and heuristics. And some time ago, probably already 10 years, I came across this quote in a strategy document for a tier one bank, which I thought was pretty interesting, as it spoke about a pretty bleak future for the human involvement, but kind of like there's some truth hidden in there around really with this future of artificial intelligence and automation. And the way that spoke to me is that as humans, we have to become better at doing things that at the moment I don't really think we're that good at. So there's a lot of things that we do that are quite repeatable that can be automated. And therefore, if we're going to compete in a future that has this type of perspective, how can we differentiate ourselves? And that's really been a little bit of my ambition, is to try and equip people with the means to move away from this pretty scary future and perhaps reinvent themselves into something that is highly valuable, at least what I see in the market and where I see some of the gaps existing. So really, I always love to start with this slide. And to be honest, I can't even recall where I originally saw this, which is probably not a good thing if I try and reflect back on some of my sources. But I've massaged it and changed it so much over the years that practically my own by now, but it talks about this learning organization. And this learning organization has got these referred to as loops. And you can kind of see across the top here, what you've got is you've got these feed forward loops, is what I've referred to them as. And then you've got your traditional feedback loops, which sort of come back off the results. And ultimately, what we have to do is we want to try and reduce the space that exists between the feed forward and the feedback loops. And you're starting to see that already in the DevOps world, aren't you? You're starting to see that with development trying to get as close as they can to operations, trying to almost make them one team. And then recently, well, actually not so recently anymore, probably a couple of years, I came across, as I was exploring this DevOps, I thought, well, what about BizOps and StratOps? Surely those things, there's also a future for those. And lo and behold, I did a search for BizOps and I found some employment sites, oddly enough, for Silicon Valley, mainly for a lot of the big operators like Amazon and Google. We're looking for BizOps people, which I thought, oh, that's quite interesting because it's a word that hardly anyone's ever used yet. But what BizOps really does is kind of move you more into this space, one up from DevOps. I should probably tweak this diagram a little more so it makes it a little clearer. But both BizOps and DevOps tend to kind of sit in this sort of section you see here between strategies, actions, and value delivery. And really what BizOps is trying to do is move closer from a business operations perspective around as we're actually seeing people subscribe and work through our journeys. We're actually tweaking it in on the fly and being able to feedback changes directly into the live system as we're seeing sales go up on one side and maybe acquisitions reducing on one side and not necessarily moving over into activations, or even into revenue. And instead of doing that through a big planning cycle, you actually do that using automation. And then connecting that with sales and operations and your supply chain, all of that sort of automate. That's really what the BizOps space is talking about. And the StratOps kind of says, well, how do we connect strategy more effectively? How can we create an adaptive strategy that, we can test ideas a lot quicker and test them actually within the business quicker and get that feedback loop coming back in. And really that's what this learning organization is all about. And And ultimately, I think there's lots of value in moving further and further to the left, and that's where I think the complexity lies. So we're starting to see AI, a lot of those things doing really well here. Are we doing things right? In other words, performance improvement, optimization type things, the highly repeatable things that we know we've done 1,000 times and we can do them right. So that's ultimately what we want to get right. That's the basics, the bare essential basics for any organization. If you're not in that space, then don't even worry about BizOps, StratOps, sort of larger learning organization. I think you've got a long way to go to get some of the basics right. And I always chuckle when I go to engagements and they've got, no, we do Agile, but there's no DevOps, there's no automation capability. I'm like, well, ultimately, you're trying to get rid of the waste that exists between your ideas and your development of those ideas and the actual changing of value for an end user and customer and changing their lives. And that journey between those two, that's what you're trying to do. And the best way to do that is through automation of all of your QA and your development and your pushing and deploying of code and release management. And that's where a lot of those sort of agile frameworks are, overarching way of thinking and approach. But without DevOps and without the automation and CI/CD capability, it's really just another project management methodology and not really much value. So that's where the automation bit sort of comes in, and you can see the DevOps piece sitting on the bottom. That is where a lot of organizations currently are. Yeah, you can say, yeah, but we don't do software development, we do product development and we build some products. Okay, point taken. So then perhaps it's more of the BizOps sort of space where you can then focus some of your attention. And just as I'm sort of speaking it out, thinking on the fly and realizing that there are a number of instances I've come across where it doesn't necessarily result in a digital product that can be launched and released through DevOps. So we're all works in progress. All right, so that's the learning organization. And really what we want to do is actually, I'm more of the feed forward type of individual. I like to look at those arrows that cut across the top here, because ultimately what happens if you don't do these correctly, if you don't do the feed forward correctly at the top here, you're going to pay a high price down the bottom here. And with that, I mean you're going to spend a lot of money on ETL, data warehousing, data insights projects, because that's really what they are. They're feedback solutions. And what they do is they try and capture and make meaning from the massive data that's coming through all the different channels and sort of plugging into your value delivery and results section of this diagram. If you don't have a plan that correctly up front, there's a sort of a cascading effect, which really has a knock-on down to the feed forward, where you're going to be struggling to make sense of what's coming out through that equation. And so really it pays you to spend a lot of time on that sort of feed forward space. And we've done some really interesting stuff and also explored and done some sort of training with MIT on the use of the systems thinking paradigm around even just project management. How can you leverage correct system thinking levers up in that feed forward space so that you can actually deliver your projects more effectively? And a lot of that's very, very counterintuitive to how projects are currently run at the moment. Right, so that's sort of setting a little bit of context that you're working with. That's where I've spoken to you about technology focusing down there. That's where DevOps is sitting. And ultimately, the promise of agility that we're looking for is all of that. Is how do we, Agile isn't just about agile delivery down in software and all the rest of it. It's how do we think in an adaptive strategy and operations and sort of development and release and execution space. So that's really what we want to be able to focus on. And we're seeing this a lot, aren't we? We're seeing, you can no longer differentiate your organization purely based upon your products and services. You've got to up the game and move that into the experiential layer. I've come across a lot of organizations that are just spending so much time focusing on, just monoline products and not necessarily looking at the experience that you must have across all of your products. So this is more of a brand experience as opposed to a product experience or a journey. So still a long way to go for organizations to begin to up their game and think in that sort of space. But what you are seeing is that as they move up here, they're starting to reinvent their business models. And really excited to see a number of platform-based projects that I've been working on, which not only are looking at the technology platform, but are also looking at what's referred to as a business platform. So, for example, a platform play could be a shopping mall. That's platform, isn't it? It's connecting us as customers walking through the door to retailers, and it's providing a platform that brings these two people together. Newspapers, same thing. You could say it's a basic, not a digital model, but ultimately still a platform, isn't it? It's a platform business model. It's bringing together readers with writers and advertisers and funds it with advertising models and those types of things. So there's a multi-sided platform at play. And you're actually seeing that A lot of digital solutions are very platform focused now. And that's really down into the sort of business model and brand platform sort of space in which you're reinventing down at that level. So you can see that we've got to change the way we're thinking around how we tackle some of these problems. You want to be able to move a little bit further up the stack so you can interact with that. And really, this sort of speaks to this sort of complexity space here. And I like this David Snowden model. It's getting quite a lot of airtime lately, specifically because people are realizing that they can't play around in the simple and complicated space anymore. They have to start to think about some of these more complex challenges that are existing in society and in their projects and in their organizations, and being able to see how they can leverage some of these techniques to solve them. So, for example, simple stuff is just the sort of basic stuff that you can expect to do in an organization. Oh, approve leave. The complicated stuff now moves into spaces where there is actually known solutions and there are known providers of those solutions. So, building a Boeing aircraft engine, it's complicated. I can't do it, but it's not complex. There's not unknowns in there. All right? There's very much known engineers that can build a Boeing engine, but it's still a complicated activity to get that airplane into the sky. It's a miracle of human invention. Then you move into the complex space, which is really, this unknown problem areas. And we're starting to tackle a lot of issues in that space as we move further up out of the business model into ecosystems. And we're starting to see, macro, micro, meso type of ecosystems and how they actually impact your business. How can you tweak those areas? And that's where, we have to use something different. That's where, I've built playbooks for systems-oriented design, merging strategy, systems thinking, and design thinking together to create this really, really powerful tool that starts to look at what we call those big sort of fourth order type problems. But really, that's what the complex space is all about. And that's actually where I believe the supermixers need to start focusing some of their attention. Because ultimately, we should already know the simple and the complicated. And that's the red ocean area. That's the area where we can expect a lot to be consuming the jobs of the future. And what's going to differentiate people like you and me is going to be for us moving up into that complex space. Right, let's just get a drink of water here. All right, so what does that mean? Well, this is probably a little dated, but I do find it interesting to see, well, have we actually moved this far? If you consider, this isn't the latest, by the way, but I put it in here specifically. We're in 2020 at the moment, and it's nice to have a bit of hindsight as we sort of reflect back on, was this really the case? So you can see, though, just in both of these sort of areas, how a lot of skills required, not only for 2020 in this case, but for the future, were very human-centered type of skills. Not necessarily frameworks and methods and techniques and even technology. It's not even in that list on the side there. Can you see all the human factors there? So a lot of it's around the way we think. A lot of it's around mindsets and those types of things, problem-solving techniques that we need to begin to apply. A lot less around what's referred to as the analytical space, rational sort of thinking area. So there's definitely a shift, according to some of these reports, that creates sort of an interesting perspective for us. This model by Richard Buchanan it's got a little bit of attention lately, but it's also one that I love to refer to, because ultimately when we talk about design thinking and systems thinking and systems-oriented design, all of that sort of stuff, you really are talking about, well, where is your problem space? Is it sort of up at the top area, which is, societal issues, political governments, even big sort of top fourth order problems could, be within organizations and all the politics around getting work done in an organization. New ways of working, quite frankly, I think would be a fourth order problem for you to be able to work with. And then you kind of move further down into interactions and experiences as you sort of move through the cycle, and all the way down into, sort of the low-level pictures and making things look nice and pretty. Now, I'm actually interested in where the comments section is on this tool that I'm using for this live stream. Probably shouldn't allow myself to get distracted with that, but this is a test of what we're doing here. I might try and solve that another day. I know I'm meant to be seeing comment stream come up here. Is that it? There it is. Okay, how about that? All right, live and learn. Oh, I've got somebody out there who's giving me a thumbs up. That's not me. Well, for an experiment, somebody's actually watching and appear to be interested in the thumbs up of what's occurred. So, well, that's all good. Whoever you are, thanks for tuning in. I'm not expecting an audience because I haven't done any advertising. This is a bit of a test, so welcome, and hopefully you'll learn something from the process. All right, so back to this. So ultimately, what we want to do is we want to build the skill set that cuts across that space. But even I was having a conversation with the MIT guys the other day, and just this concept of a fourth order system, and they had pictured a cell phone as a fourth order system. Because of the complexity, the many different systems in there that interact to make this device are also part of a broader ecosystem, but not looking at the manufacturing ecosystem around it, but the actual cell phone. I probably tended to disagree with that. I sort of viewed it more as a much sort of broader person to system and sort of broader societal type challenges that we're faced with. All right, this is the Nordstrom model, which is, you've seen many adaptations of this on the market as well. But basically what this is teaching you is that there's now no longer one specific discipline that can help you get to market. Just the same as there is now no longer one particular company that knows how to build this entire phone. Right? There are experts in CPUs, there are experts in motherboards, okay? There are experts in telecommunications technology, there are experts in app development, okay? And they all come together in an ecosystem to create this very complex device. Very few people on their own would be able to do all of that. And really what, this is what we're seeing even in the discipline sort of space, is that in order for you to take stuff from a signal through the foresight discipline, strategy discipline, through innovation and trying to understand it and design it to create it in the right mix to address certain challenges that humans are having, and then being able to iterate through that and develop it and then grow it and scale it and incubate it in your organization. Wide variety of disciplines there. This Nordstrom model really only deals with 3, but ultimately there's quite a few that we would sort of touch on as we sort of move through that space. So, this future is not just, you're not a strategist, you're not a business designer or a designer or an architect. What's actually missing, in my perspective, in industries is things called supermixers. In other words, individuals that know how all of those things work, which is quite a tall order. And trust me, it's even a bigger order to sell into the marketplace, because there's not really someone out there that says we want a supermixer. Or what do we call it? Is it a business designer? Is it an enterprise designer? Is it an architect? There's a number of disciplines that they claim to who that might be. And I don't think a name has actually emerged from that yet. Hence why, when I introduce myself, I don't put a name on there, because a variety of different sort of reasons behind that, but ultimately multiple disciplines required to get you here. So, does somebody truly understand how to use the foresight discipline to build scenarios of imminent futures that could sit ahead, and looking at uncertainty around those futures? Do they know and understand how to use exploratory and innovation techniques to innovate their strategy and use strategy game boards to determine the best strategic pathway forward? Do they know and understand how to use design thinking, SIT and TRIZ-based innovation techniques to leverage heuristics from previous problems that have been solved before and apply that into your business models and into your products and services? Do they know how to build the prototypes of those? It's nice to build a prototype down at a sort of first and second order. How do you build a prototype at a fourth order? What does it look like? And how do we experiment with that to determine if it's actually true or not? And as we cut across that into incubation space, how do we move these validated ideas and that through the treacle of incubation as we try and move through security, through procurement, through funding and budgets and traditional agile world, so we can actually get an idea to market? How do we solve all of that? And then once we've got it to market, how do we wrap it in all the support systems, and how do we then scale it so that it can actually support and grow and increase our revenue? All very, very challenging areas for us to work through, and really sort of give you a view of the journey to travel here. The important part of this is actually the vertical axis, which talks about this concrete to abstract, which is really around, most of what we're used to doing sits down here in this concrete space at the bottom. And however, what you've got on the top here is this abstract area. Well, what does it mean, abstract? Is this sort of fluffy thing? And you could say that strategy could be quite abstract. Well, I disagree with that. I think that what we've got here is this is actually based upon what's called the prism of TRIZ, which really says that if you can understand your problem sufficiently enough, you can reverse engineer it into a series of levers or dimensions that you can then apply to other companies or individuals that have used the same mix of those levers to solve the problem. Then you can take the solution that they've got and you can pull it down into your space in the solution area, and you can make it more concrete with some of the solutions that you want to be able to build. So that's what it's doing. It's moving you out of this is the known solution, the known problem space, up into something which is a little broader, a lot more abstract around where has this been solved before, and can we actually leverage it in different ways to solve current problems. A little more on that later. So, what's happened? Well, we've seen a number of sort of movements in this space around what's referred to as big A agility, which really says, well, how can we build not just delivery agility, through Scrum and Kanban and normal agile delivery techniques, but how do we actually get us to have strategic agility? How can we actually focus on structural, operational, all that sort of stuff? And that's probably where the new ways of working space is kind of merging as well. There's all these new behaviors that need to occur. But ultimately, we've got a big A problem here, not a little a problem. And that sort of big A problem is big A agility that we want to be able to work with. And if you heard that scream in the background, that's my son playing a game of Fortnite. So the joys of COVID pandemic lockdowns. All right. So really what we have here is, this commoditization of Agile. And what I've really enjoyed is looking at the history of strategy is that it starts in the rational space. And where, you basically, if you throw enough manpower at it, you've got this, if we put enough effort into it, we will think of the future and we'll be able to solve what we think the future is going to look like. So just enough analytics and enough people can be thrown at it to imagine what that future might look like. Well, we know that that's impossible. It doesn't really work that way. So it's gone to the other side, which is more evolutionary, which is more sort of mercenary type focused view of it, as opposed to an ordered, redcoats march on the battlefield, which is really around whatever, just go with it and sort of see where it leads us. And it's evolving all the time, and there's no real structure to it. And what's happened is that's pulled back to this middle area called the processual space, which is, I suppose you can equate that to a special forces unit in which they are multidisciplinary, and they parachute into situations and they use different tools in order to get a job done. But they still do it. There's repeatability in there, but there's still innovation in there. And that's the part I like about that journey. And that's why I see a lot of other disciplines going in that space as well, including this one. So this one is all talking all about this journey around, in the beginning was this very structured waterfall-based way, and then it kind of spun to the other side, and perhaps you had that extreme programming and perhaps some other ways that didn't necessarily deliver projects that effectively. You just kind of let them run haphazard and all the rest of it. And now what's happening on this side is you're kind of getting frameworks like this that are trying to pull it back towards the middle to make it processual, which allow you, yes, through an approach and a repeatable process, to be able to deliver projects, but still open it up for innovation, agility, and exploration. And that's the piece that I find really interesting. So you're kind of having a few of these disciplines do this. Not seeing it so much in places like the architecture space. So there's a journey there that they need to take. Okay. And you're kind of seeing this as well as, ultimately, this is the house of lean, which comes from the scaled agile framework sort of space. And really the key focus here is on that top bit, which is, the goal is value and value delivery and value creation, creating and capturing value. So if you look across all of the networks and strategy, so not all the disciplines, strategy, innovation, design, architecture, whatever the case might be, there's one unifying piece that brings it all together, and it's this concept of value. And so it's important for us to understand that we want to create and capture value. We want to create value for our customers, and we want to capture value for our shareholders. And therefore, how we design the business, how we mix 4 Ps or 7 Ps of marketing together, all of those things are designed to create and capture value. So that's why I like this model that they've developed, which kind of sits across the top there. Don't necessarily agree with all the stuff that's in the middle, but this is an agile sort of framework that sits in that space. Right. So, ultimately, I've highlighted this already. Most of these frameworks focus on what I refer to as process agility, which is really, I think this diagram will kind of do that, which is in the process agility space. But you can see, according to this broader agility, there's a whole lot of other areas that we've actually got to focus on. And I would consider some of those to be areas of weakness in the current industry. They're just still trying to just get that process agility working correctly. And then you've got this concept of NWOW, which is new ways of working. Man, I tell you what, that thing's become a swear word in some circles. Already, there's a lot of damage done by this word. Big vendors coming in, charging you a nice tidy fee to be able to design new ways of working for you. Not necessarily dealing with the core issue of what's wrong with ways of working, but focusing on what I call the tool set and skill set space. And I'll elaborate a little further on that later. Right? There's some big problems on how I see people currently doing NWOW. And if they're not corrected, I suspect we're going to see some of those projects come off the rails. All right, but there is an area of opportunity, all right, in which we can take just that sort of DevOps last bit of our learning journey and move it up, move it slightly left there, and start to focus on some broader areas that we can work with. And ultimately, this comes to this model, which some of our training material is going to be sort of really elaborating on across all the disciplines, across this entire signal to value stream that we've spoken around here, is where can we start to introduce patterns and learning? How early can we do it? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a little bit of an experiment with you while you're on the line, and I'm going to switch over to the iPad, which I think is going to look like this. Awesome. All right. Let's see how this works. And ultimately what we've got here is a problem solution. There we go. You're seeing that? Excellent. Okay. So what we've got here is the problem space, and what we've got here is the solution space. And really what you've actually got is all of these techniques are moving us from the unknown into a place of knowledge. All right. So uncertainty to knowledge. That's the journey that we're going. Okay. So this is unknown and this is knowledge. So what it means is over time, I've kind of got this effect occurring. Can you see? Oh, this is this. Can that rotate? It can. All right, so this is this image recognition, which probably not going to work for this demo, but we'll fix that out later. Okay. And then what you've also got, let's choose a different color here. So this is the journey that we take. We start with minimal information on the left, and through a process of all these disciplines, we move it along till we get more and more and more information, and ultimately the most perfect decision kind of sits over here, isn't it? So it's in that space, because what we really want is this to occur here. Okay. And you can see that what we've got is the black one is knowledge that we're moving from unknown to known, so we're learning more about the space. And the blue triangle is all about this vast amounts of knowledge that we've got access to. Right, so there's just this whole of the internet. There's just so much that we could plug into. And what we're doing is we're whittling it down more and more and more till ultimately we can make a decision. So when both of those two come together, that's what we've got there. We've got this sort of optimum decision-making process. But the problem with that is it just takes too much time. So if this is time, it's way too long for us to get there. So, what do we do? So people make decisions earlier on in the cycle. Right? So some people can get to this point after just having read some documentation, explored some research, some trends, and be able to make the right call. Others take a lot longer to get there. Still others might only come here. They may have made the decision over here, but guess what? They need now a whole bunch of analytical work to validate it so that they can cover their risk. Lots of waste and delays in there. Now, what's important for me is what allowed that person here to make that decision sooner. What were they drawing upon that allowed them to get to that point? And that's what I call the heuristic space. So they had developed some rules of thumb that they had perfected over time. Let's move back to this one. So they had perfected over time, which allowed them to basically make a decision quicker. And this is what I call heuristics, right? So they're rules of thumb. Now, where along this cycle do we introduce those heuristics? Where can we learn them, and how can we work with them? Now, obviously, the earlier we get to this point here, around in the foresight space, and the earlier we can make the decision, the better. So almost the first thing you would see on a foresight space is a signal, some signal in the marketplace. Could be an acquisition of a company, it could be somebody releasing some sort of marketing blurb, or whatever the case might be. What you would do in any organization is you're going to have a signal scanning capability, horizon scanning capability. And if you can build future scenarios directly off a signal, you're quite good, because there's lots of unknowns in a signal. But ultimately what you do is you try and make more knowledge around that signal. So there's a pattern beginning to emerge from a signal perspective. And when you have many signals clustering, you start to have a trend that's forming. And then that starts to make you a little more specific around, oh, okay, we've got a hard or a soft trend that's forming here. So, we've now got more information to make a decision. So similar to the diagram I've just drawn you a little further along the route. Now, ultimately, I'd like to make a decision like that. Straight away, I see a signal in the market, and I look where that's going, and know for certainty where it's going to land. Nobody can do that. Right, so we're going to continue to move through the cycle, and maybe you'll use scenarios. You'll take those trends, you'll break them down into drivers, you'll cluster those drivers in certain ways, and you'll build a series of scenarios which are the high uncertainty drivers. So you'll use scenarios to explore areas of uncertainty so that you can actually be ready for it. That's the point of scenario planning. Right? So every one of those futures can come true. And all of that's done, there are ways of thinking to help you be able to move through this foresight space to begin to experiment with the future. Right? And welcome. I've got one person watching my trial run here, whoever you are. You can comment if you want, but thanks for joining in. This is my first experiment with a live stream, and I hadn't actually invited anyone to this. I just popped it out there, and lo and behold, I seem to have somebody watching, which is always good. So there we go. So once you've experimented with this, and let's say we get to the end of a foresight stage, normally you can expect coming out of the end of that to be some scenarios or some forecasts that would emerge from that. And then now you can actually take those scenarios and forecasts, and you can start to pull out some insights. How will they impact your organization? And that will then drive your strategy, drive your products, drive a whole bunch of other sort of things that come off the back of it. So ideally, at different points along this journey, you can see we can insert different heuristics along the way, different heuristics which help me make those decisions quicker. So are there some heuristics that I can insert in the foresight space that help me make a decision quicker depending upon what signals I see? Are there some heuristics I can insert in the exploration stage that help me with my innovation activity? Are there some in the incubator stage? And the answer to that is yes. There are heuristics in that space. Man, I wish I had a whole database of those things. Actually, there is a database of those now that I think of it, but really only in the exploration stage. Actually, yeah, now that I think of it, you've got pretty much some databases across most of those areas that we can plug into. And perhaps in my next talk, I'll elaborate on some of them. Okay, well, anyway, that's good. We're progressing. All right, so that's good. That's where I see the NY operating model. I've already spoken about that. It's broad. It covers all of those pieces, which is good. And ultimately, remember what we're doing is we're creating engines of value that can create these futures. Remember, create and capture value. That's what we're focusing on. Right? So we want to create and capture value, all right, as we progress through this. And that's what a business model is for. It creates value for customers and it captures value for shareholders. Okay. So what we've got here is a business model, and I break it down into the market model, service, and operating model space. And this is all around how do we create an engine, right, or design an engine that can deliver these things. And you can expect to find a bunch of heuristics around business models that would help you be able to create the right outcomes that you're looking for. And ultimately, now this is where business designers, enterprise architects, a lot of the internal disciplines within your business, their role is to take the building blocks that sit in your organization and mix them in different ways for outcomes. So we've all heard of the 4 Ps in the marketing mix. That's exactly what happens. You're mixing these pieces together in different ways and allowing you to get different outcomes. So this is where we're starting to get this concept of mixing. Now I want you to think on where we do other types of mixing. Yes, there's some examples here. But I was thinking of the periodic table, so wouldn't it be great if we had a periodic table for business, which we could call a capability model if we wanted to, but there's a lot more complex than that. So you've got these building blocks that make up a base set of elements that you can work with. And then if you mix them in different ways, you get different outcomes. So if I mix 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, I get water, right? So this concept is called emergence in the systems thinking space. In other words, it basically says if I mix different building blocks together in different ways, all right, I'm going to get different outcomes, right? And the mix is going to give me something different, whether it's CO2, H2O, etc., etc. And exactly the same with the building blocks of an organization. If I mix marketing and sales, what do I get? I get more customers, but if I don't mix service correctly with that, I get higher churn. So you can see that just take some basic concepts and we're just mixing them in different ways that I can be able to work with. So the ability for us to mix these resources means that I need to know what those resources are. And the ability for how I mix them and stitch them together into different ways is actually the patterns and the heuristics that I'm talking about. They're the rules of thumb around how we would mix certain things together to get an outcome. All right. And I mean, ultimately, we've been doing mixing for a very long time. You probably just don't know it. And some of you who would watch this recording later would classify as super mixers. So really what we've got on the bottom left there is way down here, and I should probably have drawn this for you to get away from this boring PowerPoint mechanism. But ultimately what you've got is you've got all these functions that sit within your software code. And you can wrap those together into JavaScript or apps or something like that, or modules, and those then ultimately are grouped together to make a system, right? And then I might mix system components, and that might form the technology layer in a capability. Since the capability is people, process, technology, and information for an outcome, there is a mix of those resources to give you an outcome. I can now take the capabilities and I can mix those in different ways, and that's called a value stream, right? And also journeys, and I can give different experiences and different value to the market by mixing those things in different ways. I can take product architecture and product components, which might sit at a lower level, and I can mix them differently with different elements and different feature sets and create a whole range of new products just by mixing them differently. And ultimately, right at the top, in the business model level, you can mix entire business models in different ways, on mergers and acquisitions, sitting in your entire value system. And that's actually going to give you an opportunity to create better mixes and differentiation in the industry. So you can see mixing, all sort of different structures that we'd be able to work with. Okay. And I mean, ultimately, I've spoken about this. You can see even now as the 4 Ps of the marketing mix is shifting to what's referred to as the 4 Es. This is from Ogilvy, which I thought is really, really great insight into how the shift is now beginning to occur. And you can see how this discipline of mixing sits at other levels. You've got this sort of utility layer, then you've got the layer in the middle in which the mix occurs. And that's really that heuristic area as we take complex problems and we mix solutions differently. Have a look at some CK knowledge, or CK theory might also help you there as you understand how to mix more effectively. I don't have time to sort of work through all that detail. All right. So this sort of reinforces around no single discipline can actually cover all of those pieces. So these super mixers have got to have a variety of disciplines at their disposal so they can actually answer some of these questions. And here you can see just one example of where design thinking bridges the mystery into the heuristic space, trying to find what those heuristics are up at the abstract level so that it can reuse them and see whether you can solve the problem with some of those abstract heuristics that might have been identified. And then but later on, you might have architecture thinking, agile thinking, which shifts you between the heuristic space and down into algorithmatize and basically create repeatable processes, which comes off the back of that. This is The Knowledge Funnel by Roger Martin. Great book, by the way, the Design of Business. But he's also done a great book on strategy and adaptive strategy, which I also found really, really useful. All right. So now what that means is, is this the recipe for super mixers? I think it's maybe broader than that, but you've heard this concept called hybrid thinking. Well, if I were to add system thinking in there as well, then we're getting into another different space. Where's strategic thinking in this space? So what I liked about the term hybrid thinking was it kind of leaves you open for a few disciplines that could actually merge into that space. And I was actually quite interested to find that at the University of Queensland, there's actually a specific course on hybrid thinking. I forget who it was under, but I was very interested to see that the universities had begun to adapt some of that stuff and build some hybrid thinking models into this area. Right. So, where should we focus? As we kind of move across the cycle. I love that little 2x2 in the right there. It just sort of helps clarify a few things. And you can overlay heaps of stuff on this 2x2, by the way, and answer some really, really interesting questions. Whether you put processes, capabilities, products, businesses on top of that, the same sort of outcome applies from that. So things on the top right are highly complex but highly valuable. And we spoke about the complex space. So it means that we can't apply agile thinking. We can't apply architecture thinking, which are very rational type tools to this. We've got to apply something that's more in the intuitive space in the top right quadrant. And that's really the creative world. Right? And the design thinking is the ability to extract that innovative, creative thinking and move it down to identify heuristics, so you can take it down from the top right quadrant and push it possibly down at the bottom right. And that's even a completely different discipline. That's where your lean and your Six Sigma and all of those now improvement activities start to come in that bottom right quadrant. And ultimately in your bottom left, you've got this automation space in your ERP systems and CRM, all that sort of stuff. And top left, you've kind of got outsource activities. So you can see, there's a whole bunch of sort of different areas in which we could actually focus our attention. I mean, I like to focus on creating the bridge between the top right and the bottom right, because that's actually where the value lies. So when we're super mixing, like the 4Ps of marketing and all those types of things, they're kind of also on the right-hand side. You want to be able to innovate in the complex space. You want to identify the patterns that emerge from that, and those are your differentiation that you can then roll and commoditize across your business, roll into your business through processes, through technology. So that's really where I think most of the value is, and we need to figure out how to apply some heuristics down to that level. Okay. All right. So, and what I'm saying is, for all of these disciplines, regardless of whether you're a designer, an architect, strategist, the secret sauce is the heuristic. It's the lessons learned and where you've applied this before, and you've seen the mix that works for you, and you start to then leverage that in future projects. Now, that's not what I'm saying. You hear this term of patterns, but I'm not seeing heuristics and rules of thumb that are documented in a nice sort of simple way, especially up in the top right quadrant. You may get it perhaps down in the bottom left, like a business model canvas, and a business model canvas for the Gillette business model, for example. That's actually a version of a heuristic, which shows the different components that are mixed of a business to give you an outcome that gives you a Gillette type model, or a Jetstar type business model, or a multi-platform, multi-sided marketplace type model. They're all sort of some element of recipe that would allow you to achieve that outcome. All right. So ultimately what we want is, we've got these building blocks at the bottom, and we want to be able to mix them better at the top. All right. And what I've seen some really great stuff here, and specifically the behavioral economics area, all right, which is the heuristics that we can apply. So when we trying to shift behavior of our citizens, right, we would want to look at behavioral economics to be able to shift that behavior more effectively. So there's the IKEA effect, right? Basically follows the principle of we will love it more if we make it with our hands. All right, so there's a few of those which I really find really interesting in Sketchplanations. He's sort of drawn some really great diagrams on expanding some behavioral economics things. But the city of Singapore has done some fantastic stuff from a behavioral economics perspective, and how they shift the behavior of people. And I think you're actually seeing that at a macro scale at the moment with COVID, and how behavioral economics are being used to get you to wear masks, to get you to do a whole variety of other sort of things. So what you've actually got there on the right-hand side, okay, is on the right-hand side is, from a process perspective, there's actually techniques that you can also use in order for us to improve what we refer to as ideality. Okay, I won't go into detail there, but basically what this allows you to do is that there are heuristics that you can apply at a people level and at a process level that give you innovation capabilities that you can leverage as we progress. There's also, archetypes. This is the Harley Davidson Outlaw archetype. So what they've actually got from a behavioral perspective is they understand the behavioral dimensions of their customers, and then they build a brand around that. And this is where personas are actually really, really good. So in personas, to a certain extent, must capture the behavioral aspects of your target market. This is the point of personas. I can't stand it when I see a persona and it's this is the CEO persona, or this is the executive leadership persona. That's not a persona, that's a role, right? Personas are behavioral focused, all right? And what that means is you must describe a persona based upon behavior. What do you hear from the outlaw personas? It could be what's an O? Well, how about well, now I'm on the spot. Freaky Freddy, frequently shopping Freddy, or something to that extent. Trying to think of a name of a person that starts with an O. Just got a complete blank. So it would be Outlaw Oxen. I just clearly, live on camera, can't think of it. But ultimately, what that outlaw one is talking about is a behavioral profile that you actually want to be able to change. So if you understand your personas and you understand the behaviors of those personas, then you're in a better position to actually pull the right levers to change behavior. And there's some great stuff you can actually do in the empathy map that allows you to identify the levers that you can pull to change behavior. Okay, more on that in the course that we have on design. There's also a whole bunch of patterns of innovation in the business architecture space. These are all TRIZ-based patterns, all right, and there's an entire discipline in this space in which we've used some of the TRIZ-based things and some of the SRT frameworks as well to move us up into the abstract space, but understand the dimensions of the problem area and see whether they've been solved before through other problem spaces by mixing these slightly differently. So there's some really great innovation frameworks that have captured the heuristics into the components that underneath, and also seen how other people have assembled those components to solve certain problems. So if you can understand the componentry and you can map your problem to their problem, you're in a great position for you to be able to reverse engineer it and apply some of the componentry to your problem space. All right, so this is now the prism of TRIZ. All right, so let's look at a bit of an example. As you see on the top right there, the Nordstrom model based upon the prism of TRIZ. So what you've got on the bottom left here is your specific model, all right, and your specific problem space. And in this case, we've got a tall building and we want to clean the windows on the outside. How do you do that? So you get somebody to Spider-Man up the outside. Is there another way to do it? Can we solve this problem? All right. So what you do is you take it up into the next space, and now we're in the abstract area. You identify similar problems from other industries, all right, that may be relating to cleaning, injuries, costs, all of these factors, which is referred to as ideality factors, all right? And you're starting to look at, is there generic problems that are similar to mine that we can work with, right? And what you use is now you use these heuristics frameworks and you go and identify, is there something similar? And you can see it says here, you've got a couple of options. Now, because they're concepts, they're not ideas. So it's just going to give you the conceptual view of how this problem is solved, but not the actual idea. You still have to come up with that. All right, so you can see here are some concepts. Introduce an element that will clean the exterior from inside without complicating the design. No new substance or part system itself will do the useful function. In other words, don't add anything. Can you use the parts of the system to do the cleaning itself? Or zone of contradiction itself, performance or function. So in other words, can the windows clean themselves? Okay. So basically, looking at the patterns of how these things have occurred similarly, those are some options that you can explore. So now take those and come up with some ideas that sit at the bottom here, and you can see how we've learned through the process of traveling through the prism of TRIZ to arrive at this point. So option 1 for IFR1 was a cleaning tool with a magnet. The next one was sliding windows, so they could actually slide in the different parts, and they would actually clean the window in the process. And the other one was nanobites, which would actually clean the window itself as part of the structure that was sitting in it. So you can see, now that you've learned from other industries, you can begin to apply it. So this is what we're talking about, heuristics, and as we move through the space. Funnier example, which is this one, which was a cartoon driven by, I forget who drew this cartoon, but ultimately looking at, you've got these two bowls that you're drinking from. You can see the crane on the left, top left, can't necessarily drink it, but it can't bend down. So there's a TRIZ principle there, which is talking about dimensional height. All right, so the answer there is add another dimension. So you can see we just put the square in, and this animal can now drink. Same story the other way around. Okay, where the fox can't get into the water, and so TRIZ principle 24 says add an intermediary. That's the concept. Now we must come up with the idea. So the intermediary is a straw, and problem solved. Anyway, very, very simple, humorous way to have a look at that particular problem. But you can kind of see it played out in different ways here. You can see how in design it's called morphological analysis, in which there's a conveyor belt for our luggage, and we can now apply that back towards how we eat in a restaurant. So a number of those sort of different patterns that we'd play for. All right, I'm probably going to stop here, but I'm moving into a very, very complex area. And this has been a test of live streaming. Just to kind of see how it works with my new setup here. And this was a talk that I did in Austin for a business design conference, and also here in Sydney for a local business architecture conference, as I was challenging those attending to be thinking more in the heuristic space. So I'm going to kind of stop it there. Won't take any questions, but nobody's online, right? Because this is a test. But really, this is a recording now. So hopefully that's given you some idea of the business design space and the need for these heuristics that can sort of plug into that area and help you with this process. But in our training pack, which will be business design and business innovation sort of training that we're going to be launching specifically in 2021, we'll be training a lot of people on these techniques. How do you apply, all right, the prism of TRIZ to re-engineering your business capabilities? how do you apply SIT to create new business models that you can actually create by looking at the form of something before the function and reversing that process around? How do we do adaptive strategies so that we can close the feed forward and feedback loops quicker? So there's all of these things that we're going to be launching in 2021, which will help you through this process. I might give this presentation again in a different structure later on, but that's our test completed. So for those of you that did quickly check in or are watching this video later, once again, you're in a test space. But thank you for sitting and watching, and add some comments, because I know that we obviously want to get feedback. I can't stand PowerPoint. It can be death by 1,000 cuts. So hence, we'll be using the whiteboard behind me sometime in the future. Maybe make it a little more immersive for some of your, to make it more engaging. Right, so thanks everyone, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future. So, lost my mouse, and I'm going to come here. Goodbye. Does that work?